Welcome back. The long wait for justice for the families of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon is almost over, as Western Australia's Claremont Killer awaits his fate for the murder of the two women. The sentencing for Bradley Robert Edwards in the Western Australian Supreme Court is currently underway. He faces life imprisonment for the convicted abduction and killings of Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon in 1996 and 1997. The 52-year-old has been found not guilty of the 1996 murder of Sarah Spears. Edwards could face one of the harshest penalties ever handed down in the state, the prosecutor flagging she may seek a no parole sentence. For more analysis now, let's bring in Sky News contributor Jane Marwick and Steve Pennells, an investigative reporter who's been looking closely at this trial and this case. Just let you all know, our reporter Emily Evans, our Perth reporter, is inside court. She's been sending some messages to me from inside the courtroom, where right now victim impact statements are being read out. As we know, Bradley Edwards is also being sentenced for a sex attack in Huntingdale and also a rape in Perth's Carrot Cemetery. He did plead guilty after the trial to those. Now, the latest information from our reporter Emily Evans says that the Huntingdale attack victim, in her victim impact statement, has said that Edwards was the villain of my nightmares. She said, "I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor and I've had enough." The Carrot rape victim has also delivered an impact statement describing her experience as the most horrific night of her life. She said, "You don't ever recover from sexual assault. It is a lifelong sentence." Jane Marwick, first to you. What are you expecting? I feel like the public expectation is that nothing less than life behind bars with no parole is appropriate.
Yeah, I would say so, Ash, and we've only had one case of that, and that was Anthony Robert Harvey, who murdered 5 members of his family, and he was sentenced to life with no parole, Ashley, and that was also with Justice Hall. So I think the hopes of Western Australians will be pinned on Justice Hall this afternoon, that Edwards does not ever get parole, because certainly, Ashley, the people of Western Australia never, ever want to see this man walk free.
Steve Pennells, I know you've been looking closely at this man, Bradley Edwards, his character. Emily also has just sent me through a message saying that so far, sitting there listening to the victim impact statements, which go through just how traumatising his actions were for his victims, there's been no reaction from Edwards, no emotion. This has been the case, Steve, hasn't it, the entire way through? Very little reaction or emotion from Bradley Edwards.
And it's incredibly hard on the families. I mean, this is a quarter of a century we're talking about, and Huntingdale victims a lot earlier. It's been 4 years, actually, to the day since Edwards was charged with the murders. And this has just dragged on, and there's been no indication that he's giving anything from his side. And I mean, I'm not a criminal psychologist, but we've seen this with a lot of people charged over these horrific crimes. It's a bit of control, and one thing they probably still have over the families and the victims. I mean, we saw it with Ivan Milat, who went to his grave refusing to admit his part in the crimes, and also if there were any more victims. And I think we may see the same here. And also, you've got to remember that there's probably going to be a chance of an appeal here. It's not over. The indication is that Edwards' legal team are looking at avenues to appeal. I'm not sure how much success they'll have, but it's certainly not going to be over today. I think it's going to drag out a bit for the families, unfortunately.
Yeah, Jane, it is another tough day for the families, of course, that's clear. And as Steve points out, there's still no word on the location of the body of Sarah Spears, despite the WA Premier essentially pleading to Bradley Edwards to reveal anything he knows about it, even though we should point out he wasn't found guilty of her murder with no body found.
That's right, Ashley, and the Premier said he would like Bradley Robert Edwards to tell police where Sarah Spears is. I think the whole state, possibly the whole nation, feels like that. I too share Steve's concerns. Should the court give Edwards' team leave to appeal, he has until the 3rd of February. I think everybody hopes that whatever the sentence is handed down today, that he doesn't seek leave to appeal, that in fact that he does let authorities know where Sarah Spears is, because I think most of us are convinced that he took the life of Sarah Spears. But I think that Steve's on the money here, Ashley, when he talks about that lack of emotion and that control, and knowing perhaps that he killed Sarah Spears and not letting that family have any kind of closure. So I'm thinking of that family today. You've got the Glennon family and the Rimmer family, very, very difficult for them today, but also the Spears family, because there is no news on what happened to Sarah Spears.
Steve, we all lived through this period in Perth. We know how horrific it was at the time, how it changed the face of Perth and how people really behaved when they were going out on the town, essentially, and it seemed to move from this small town vibe to feeling like it was a dangerous city. You have looked back, I know, at this period, coming up with this documentary, which is going to be airing on Sky News. The appeal, if it happens aside, the sentencing, I imagine, is the final piece for the doco to get to where. Tell us a bit about it and how you went coming up with
about the doco,
the final product. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, the sentencing is the final piece, but the doco is basically completed. The sentencing is just a postscript, basically, but it's we're looking back at the crimes and what it did to the city and the families affected by it. We've also got, and I'm not sure if this has been publicised yet, but you know, I'll tell you now, we've also got one of his victims who escaped, and she's speaking for the very first time, a victim that no one knew about, and she gives an extraordinary interview, and she's the heart of this documentary. But we look at the police case, we look at the families, and just what it did to that city. But yeah, it's a case like few others, and it's interesting we're talking about Ciara as though he's guilty, and I mean the court found him. There wasn't enough evidence, but the court did say he was most likely to have committed that crime, and even the government's going so far as to say, you know, tell us where the body is. So I find that quite extraordinary that we've taken that step to still assume someone that he's guilty of something that he wasn't found guilty of. But I guess it's the horrific nature of the crimes and also the other two victims that he was found guilty of. But look, there are other people who he attacked and other people who escaped that weren't represented in court, and we look at some of those as well.
Well, you've piqued my interest there, Steve, about the victim who got away, who's spoken to you for the first time. Flesh that out for us. I know we'll have to obviously wait for the doco to get to air to hear from her and hear her words, but tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, she was one of his earliest victims. I mean, she was prepared by the DPP. She was going to be a witness, and she was lined up to be a witness, but they didn't end up using her and a couple of other women because they wanted to link the DNA on the kimono attack with the Karakata rape and Ciara Glennon's the DNA in her fingernails. So this woman was actually spared giving evidence in court, but it was a harrowing time for her. She was, just to give you some very rough details, she was attacked in her home. She was a young mother. She was attacked in her home at a young age. She fought him off. He ran away, and the details you'll see in the documentary. And she didn't know. She grew up living through the Claremont attacks like we all did, but didn't know that the man who attacked her was the man who went on to commit the murders. And she didn't find out until just before he was arrested. And the police knocked on her door and said, by the way, we want to investigate that attack on you all those years ago. And then she still wasn't told who it was until a little bit later. And then, you know, the penny dropped, and it's been, as you can expect, quite traumatic for her because she's had to relive the entire attack again, but not just that, but then realise who it was who actually attacked her.
Yeah, well, we're all looking forward to seeing it. Jane, just finally, what sort of closure does this bring without a body of Sarah Spears, with the appeal still, the prospect of that still hanging over us? We can't really quite say this is the end yet.
No, we can't, can we? Look, I just hope today, I think that if we see a sentence of life imprisonment and no chance of parole, then that will be very well received. But, you know, I'm just thinking back, like everyone, even if you're watching us on Sky News around the country or in different countries, if you were here in Perth during that time, this town changed irrevocably, and it still casts such an awful shadow over this city. So Ashley, today, and you might remember that when we're all on here together during the court case, at the time, the judge said that the sentencing would occur on the 24th, and the courtroom sort of erupted and people said, no, not Christmas Eve. To my mind, this is still terribly close to Christmas for these families, Ash.
It certainly is, and I've just got another note through from our reporter, Emily Evans, who is in court. She says that Edwards has declined to participate in a psychiatric report. The prosecution is saying that he does remain a danger to all in the community. And just one final line here that she sent me through from one of his victims, as read out in her victim impact statement. It says to Edwards, "I hope you're treated as well in prison as you treated us." And I'm sure there's a lot of sympathy for that view among the Western Australian public today. Steve Pennell's Jane Marwick. We will be updating our viewers throughout the day as we get that sentence through. So all the developments coming up here on Sky News. Thank you for your insights. Appreciate that.
Thank you.